Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that very warm introduction, Amit. And it genuinely is my pleasure to be here with you on Diwali. Happy Diwali. I'm so envious. I wish I was over there celebrating with you. Again, it's my absolute pleasure to be with you. My name is Gemma Blezard, for those of you who don't know me. I have been working with Salesforce for 12 years now. I started off as a Salesforce administrator, looking after about 200 salespeople, and basically helping them to sync it up with Outlook was the first thing. But actually, the first time I ever logged into Salesforce was through the API. I was actively working with data. Data was a strength of mine. I have an IT degree from the University of Northampton here in the UK. Very nice small university. I deliberately chose it because I wanted to have a closer knit connection with my lecturers, and it turned out it was the best degree for this job. I did business and IT, and I use it every single day, and I'm very proud of the fact that I use it every day. I've spent 4 years kind of working in consultancies. So I worked for IBM, I've worked for Capgemini, I've also worked for various boutique consultancy firms here in the UK. And I've also spent 3.5 years working for an ISV partner. I worked for Financial Force as a PSA specialist, and that's really where I grew into my role as a Salesforce architect, having to kind of string different managed packages together, having to work with large volumes of data, and having those really important security-based conversations. And Ladies Be Architects is all about that mission. Ladies Be Architects is a small, we are a non-profit. We are 5 of us, 5 ladies, that's why it's called Ladies Be Architects, because we're 5 women who have started up a community where people can learn and grow together, and they can enhance one another's study and preparation for exams like the CTA, the Certified Technical Architect. But also from a female perspective, we actually, as women, the way I think, and this is just a personal opinion, I think a lot of the way that we are wired is that it's a big jump, it's a big deal to go and pick something up and do it for yourself and do it on your own, right? And it takes a lot of guts to do it. You're more likely to do that if you've seen another woman doing it. That solidarity, that camaraderie is what Ladies Be Architects is all about. We are showing people how we're building our careers, and we are creating a space for people to celebrate active learning, learn together, and support one another and celebrate one another's achievements. So that's why I'm here, because I'm quite an advocate for diversity in that sense. The community of Ladies Be Architects is for everybody. It's not something that you can join, it's something you participate in. And that participation can be as simple as come to our website, read some of the stories of the people who in our community who have been working towards the architect certification. But you can also use our content. If you're studying for an exam, come to the Ladies Be Architects YouTube channel and subscribe. Every single month we drop one more study group, and we've been doing quite a lot of Heroku stuff lately. So if any of you are interested in Heroku, I can highly recommend that you come and have a look at some of the study groups we've put together. And finally, what else? Why else am I here? Well, I write. So I actually have a blog where I share my revision notes and my thoughts around certification exams. And if you have visited that blog, thank you. It means a lot to me that it's being read. You often throw content out there. You can speak at conferences, World Tour, Dreamforce, write some blogs, etc. But at the end of the day, when you're just sat at your own desk writing stuff, you don't see, and publishing stuff, you don't see who's out there reading it. They're just numbers. But then all of a sudden you go to an event and people come up and tell you, oh, I read this post and it's been very helpful to me. And that for me is actually why I do this. I do this because I genuinely enjoy helping people. So that's a bit about me. I'll stop going on now. What are we going to do today? We are going to take a deep dive into some technical content around sharing architecture in Salesforce. It's a subject that is very dear to my heart and soul. I worked as an administrator for 18 months in a private sharing model org. And for me, there was no more valuable experience than that, having to manage things day by day, having to do sweeps So ownership sweeps, moving data between different owners because of the sharing architecture, it really helped me to get to understand it better. So I am going to use some previous Ladies Be Architects slides just because they're awesome. And they've got videos in there that actually bring it to life for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can address them at the end. And I'm happy to go over some other concepts for you. We also have some other resources that I can direct you to if you want to know a little bit more about this. Okay, so we're going to look at an overview of sharing architecture. We're going to look at organization-wide defaults, or OWDs. We're going to look at the role hierarchy, sharing rules, team sharing, territory management, and other ways to share in Salesforce. So to do this, I have to basically flip over into here. Hopefully you can see my screen, but starting from the very beginning, as we know, Salesforce is a database that sits on the internet, just like any other, that's the best way for me to describe this in simple terms. Where Salesforce differs from many other on-premise or cloud applications is that when it comes to the sharing and visibility of data, the ownership, the concept of record ownership is absolutely essential to understanding how sharing works in Salesforce. It's not very often that you come across existing systems that have a record owner. Certainly when I'm working with clients who want to integrate Salesforce, the concept of an owner is almost alien to them unless, so we have to do a little bit of lots and lots of talking around this and explaining the benefit and the value of creating accountability inside Salesforce, and also using that ownership model to ensure that your data is secure. With the growth of legislation, data privacy laws around the world, so for example, the CCPA in California and the GDPR over here in Europe, we actually have to, as architects, think more about how we can introduce that privacy and respect the privacy laws by design. So what you might do, for example, is suggest that by default, every project that we do will have a private sharing model. And we will then open up and be more precise about who gets to see what, because it's good practice to do that as you're processing data. Okay, so this overview is designed to just explain how sharing architecture works in Salesforce. It works in layers, okay? So the first thing that we look at is implicit sharing, which I'll go through in just a moment. And implicit sharing is basically the fact that you own that record, or the fact that someone beneath you in the role hierarchy owns that record, therefore you get to see it, okay? So we all know that when you create a record in Salesforce, it belongs to you. You naturally, automatically, implicitly get that access to that data. Once we've looked at the implicit, once you've got access to a record that you own, the next thing that comes into play is your organization-wide defaults. Now, if you're familiar with your OWDs, and I will show you more in just a moment, then you'll be familiar with several different concepts of object visibility. One of them being public read write, which is a free-for-all. Everybody can see, touch, change anything and any records within that object. But then you also have public read only and private. And where we really show our value as architects is when we start to really probe and understand from a customer and think about and ask questions about, for example, opportunities. What kind of organization do you run? Is it a competitive sales organization? If so, do you want people to be able to see each other's opportunities, or do you want them to operate in their own little space? So those are kind of operating model conversations that we have to have as architects. And all the time as we're having those conversations, in the back of our minds, and we've all done it, and we have to resist the temptation to do it too heavily, but we start to formulate a plan in our head of how we're going to implement this. For me, my general rule is the minute someone says that, oh, only these guys should be able to see it, you're talking private. You're talking a private share or a public read-only sharing model, which means that your sharing architecture is all the more important. So your organization-wide defaults, they govern what your the general accessibility of that object throughout the organization across everybody. Then you start to look at the role hierarchy. Now, role hierarchy is only really technically relevant when if you have any objects that are either private or public read-only. And the role hierarchy is what governs the accessibility of data on a hierarchical level. So if you're a manager, you're going to want to see everything that is in your team. But you might not want your team members to see each other's stuff. So your role hierarchy is how you manage that. Once you have your role hierarchy in place, you can then start on your org-wide defaults. That's when you can start to open up access to data through sharing rules. And designing those sharing rules is another important step for you as an architect, because you have to think about how you're going to create a sharing rule in such a way that it creates scalability, and your admins don't have to keep coming in and changing it. It can just sit there and ticking away in the background. So you have to think very carefully about those things. Sharing rules will open up, or and as you can see in this kind of in this triangle, you know, when you get down to implicit sharing, that's very, very precise accessibility of data. But as you start to work your way through the different layers of functionality that enable sharing, you notice that you're opening up access to that data more. Once you've got your sharing rules in place, if you need them, the next levels of access go through manual sharing. So being able to add a person, being able to actually physically share a record with another human, with another user, so that they can access that data on a one-off basis. Team sharing is actually one of my favorites. We used to use this a lot at D&B. We had the way that they operationalized their sales team was that they had field people who were out traveling around the country and visiting customers, but they had a telephony partner, telesales partner, who would sit. They would be paired up for the year. They would have a portfolio of accounts, and we would use default account teams to ensure that those two people always had access to all of the accounts in their portfolio, and that when you looked at that account, you could see who the other collaborators were on that opportunity. And then finally, there's territory management. And territory management, I have actually delivered, it was our very first study group for Ladies Be Architects. If you want to know how enterprise territory management works, I can highly recommend that you watch that video. It will explain when to use territory management and why to use territory management. But it's the final kind of layer on the sharing architecture. It doesn't get used that often. It can be a little bit fiddly to set up, but you know, it's just my mouse to get to the next slide. So I'm gonna go through each of these one by one and just show you how it is going to work. There we go. So let's look at implicit sharing. So the types of implicit sharing that you have in Salesforce is you have parent sharing, and that's read-only access to a parent when you're viewing the child records. So if you have objects that are related to via master detail, if you view a child record, say for example an invoice is a child of an account, you will be able to have read-only access to that account if you have access to the invoice that's related to it. Okay. What that means is it can be a little bit costly to maintain, and I mean costly in terms of admin overhead as opposed to physical money, because it means that if you've got many children, many invoices against that account, or that many cases against that account, you know, you're kind of looking around a bit more. So the other type of access you have is child access. So if you own the parent record, you are automatically going to be able to see the child records. So for example, accounts with cases, the only time this child access does not kick in is when you've got a controlled by parent setting for each object in the organization-wide sharing default. What it does mean is that obviously if you've got let's say a case and an account, a case is a child of an account. If you grant access to a case that's controlled by parent, then the access to that case is basically dependent on whether you can access that account. Okay, so if you lose access to that account, you will not be able to see its cases. The other type of implicit sharing is the owner, as we talked about earlier. So if we create a record, we automatically own it. That gives us the God access to the record, so we can read and edit all of our own stuff. And then the next type of sharing is through role hierarchy. So this is if you are in a role, if you as a user have a role assigned to you and there are subordinates in that role hierarchy, you will have access to the records that are owned by the users in the roles that report to you. Okay? So child records of the parent shared up the hierarchy can also be accessed further up as well. So even if your manager can see your opportunities, their manager can see them, their manager can see them all the way up to the CEO level at the top. So that's what the implicit sharing is. So once you understand that and you understand how that works, you then can start to draw put your mind towards, okay, what's the next thing that we need to do to open up sharing? And that is the organization-wide defaults. This is the first layer of sharing, and there are three main types of setting. You have public read writes, everyone can see and change anything. Public read only, where only the owner and those above them in the role hierarchy can change the record, but everyone can see it. And then we have private, which is nobody can see it except the owner and those above them in the role hierarchy. Okay. There are also two other very specific settings for cases and leads, which is public read write transfer. So let's have a look and see what this looks like in action. So as we can see, we're coming into the setup menu inside Salesforce. As you can see, I did this quite a while ago. And we go into our sharing settings, which is where we'll find the organization-wide defaults. And as you can see, for leads and cases, you've got public read write transfer. For contacts, it's controlled by parent, which is the account. So if you can access the account, you will be able to see the contact. So we're going to make a little change to one of the settings here, and we're going to go and make leads private. Are we going to go private? Come on, Jem, what are we doing? Okay, you'll see here as well that there are other ways to share. You can share through manager groups, you can share through manual sharing and standard report visibility as well. But that is just to show you effectively how you change those settings. Let's talk about record ownership. I talked earlier about how it's at the core of access capabilities. What it actually means conceptually is a lot more than that, right? So we talk about users having responsibility for their own record and for maintaining the data on that record and ensuring that it can be relied upon. Through training, through change management, all of that stuff is as important as setting up the data model itself. So if you are talking about sharing and visibility, where you can really add value as an architect is to look at it in two ways. One is what's going to make it easier and more engaging for my users and enable them to own these records and manage them. But then on the other side, it's around ensuring that security and that the system is relevant and they're only seeing what they need to see to do their job. From a technical level, it does add some complexity, and I'll explain why in a minute. With record ownership, it means your users have responsibility for the record. They can collaborate in a structured way through teams and share tables, but it also means that each record has to have one owner. Now, if we look at this, if we look at how this works for accounts, for example, that when you make an account public, read only, or private, it actually spins up an account share table, which is sitting around in the background of Salesforce. Now you can get to this account share table through the data loader. You can also get to it programmatically through code, which means that you can customize one-off sharing scenarios based upon data that is cut, but based upon inserting and deleting data from those share tables. Now, when a record is owned, each record will usually have one owner, which could be a user, it could be a queue, or it could be a territory. For records to be enabled for queues, for queue ownership, you have to go to the queue section and enable that object first of all. So you add that object in. But also, one of the things I have found in the past is that with a custom object, I couldn't actually enable queue ownership until I enabled activities for that custom object. That may have changed, but just to say. In terms of ownerships, only the parent objects in a master detail relationship can have owners. So cases can have owners because they're special. But if I create a using the invoice option, so if I create an invoice that's related to an account and it's master detail because I want to roll up all of the total invoice value onto the account, that's a great justification for that. But it also means that if the owner has access, or whoever has access to the account, will also be able to see all the invoices through implicit sharing. Okay, now we're going to talk about the role hierarchy. The role hierarchy is a hierarchical structure that you set up in Salesforce. It's one of the first things that you do. Sometimes you don't need a role hierarchy. If everything is public read write, then I would say keep your role hierarchy blank, because then you've always got the opportunity to readdress that in the future if your needs change. Always align your hierarchy to your organization's sharing requirements. Don't be tempted to turn it into an org chart. It's not an org chart. If you want to build an org chart, you can always create contacts, and you can use users, and you can use the manager field to create an org chart in your org. Do not use Salesforce role hierarchies to do it. Let's have a look at what we do here with the roles. So we can find it in the setup menu under users and roles. And we set up some roles. Now you can see here that we've got a couple of roles here. So we've got the sales rolling up into CEO, and we can add a new role that reports into that CEO. So we're going to create one for customer service VP. Yeah. This is usually kind of a one-time setup thing. You shouldn't be actively changing your role hierarchy all the time. Then you assign a user to that role, as she's doing here. And we can also add sub-roles directly from that as well. So we've got the VP of customer service. Now we can create a customer service manager that rolls into that VP role. And we can assign users to that role. Let's see what she's doing now. So yeah, that's always annoying. You always click do not show that page and it just ignores you anyway. So we can add more and more as we go and just start to build up. So in reporting to the service manager, we've got the agents. Now, this is aligned to sharing requirements because from the VP of customer service, they're going to need to see the metrics that are produced from all the cases that we manage. And in terms of adding those users and change and update, so we're putting Bruce into the role of customer service, and then we're going to put some people underneath. But Bruce is going to have access to all of the cases that belong to the people in his team. But what it also means is that we can make cases, we can actually create some privacy around those cases within the teams that report to that VP of customer service, because we've set up those roles. Public groups. I love public groups, and I make it a habit to create public groups to represent different departments. And there's a great way that you can make this very scalable. Okay. And the best practices around this is to use your role hierarchy in order to create public groups. Now, a public group is another way of enabling sharing. You can actually say in the sharing settings, I want to keep all opportunities private in the OWD, but then you could create a sharing rule that says share all opportunities within EMEA, role and subordinate sales EMEA, share with roles and subordinates sales EMEA. And that means that all the opportunities that the guys in sales in EMEA see are only EMEA opportunities. It also means that when new starters come on board, if you create a public group that's based upon roles and subordinates, you create a new user, you assign them a role, and they automatically inherit group membership based on the role that they've got. So I'm creating a group here for all of sales. And I'm going to go and use the role and subordinates. And you can see we've got Sales America, Sales EMEA, Sales WW. And all I'm doing here is I'm adding all 3 of those sibling sales teams to one public group because they're all in separate sections of the role hierarchy. Another thing I can do in here is I can add other groups to this. So if I wanted to create another group which is called sales and customer service, then I could add in those sales roles, and I could add in that sales group that I created, but then also add in all of the customer service guys as well. And finally, what we're doing here is Gemma's creating a team. So with this public group that she's got here, she can actually add individual users to her team. Now, this is something I don't recommend happens too often because, you know, people come and go and it's more admin overhead to go and manage the groups. I prefer to use it with roles, but this is showing you what's possible here. And then finally, you can just add individual roles as well. So let's say we wanted to just create a role, create a group that's just customer service. We just add in the agents and the managers. Yeah, the customer service teams, agents and managers. And what is she doing now? Yeah, so now she's creating a final public group, which is comprised of all of the management roles. What it means is that if our VP of customer service leaves, we set up a new user, we assign that role, and they automatically inherit membership of that group. The third layer is sharing rules. I talked about that earlier. So sharing rules are used to access open up access to records. It's based on record criteria and record ownership. You would use these if you have a private sharing model or a public read-only model, because you would use it to extend edit access in that situation, or read access for private models. So let's have a look at setting up some sharing rules here. Remember, we created our groups. We're going to create one group here for finance. The finance group, as you can see, we've added quite a few more since. We can just add in our CFO. And what I'm doing here is going in to check what roles report into our CFO. So VP of Finance, Accounts Payable, Accounts Receivable, Financial Controller, Management Accountant. So we can go in and get all of those roles. Make sure that they're all added because we did role and subordinates instead of just adding the roles. And then we go into our sharing settings. And this is our OWD. So you can see accounts and contracts are private. So you will only be able to see or change the record if you own it or if someone beneath you in the role hierarchy owns it. So we go down and we create a sharing role. We want to open this up. We want to open up access to accounts and share them with finance because they're private. So we're going to base it on record owner, but we can toggle between that and criteria as well. So we could say for finance, we actually only want to give them a subset of accounts. We only want them to be able to see customer records, customer accounts. They don't need to see anything else. So I'm just ticking all of those ones and I'm saying, based on this criteria, if the type is customer, we're going to share with the finance team. And as you can see, I'm being quite diligent about my descriptions here, and just so that anyone who comes after me can read this sharing rule and know what it does. So it shares customer account records with the finance department based on criteria. So we call these criteria-based sharing rules. Then we say, who are we going to share this with? So we're going to share this with a public group called finance. What kind of access are we going to give them to the 3 objects that are involved here that are controlled by parents? We have opportunity access, case access. Now Salesforce will go away and it will run some calculations. It will show you the sharing rule has been added, and we can go ahead and add a couple more. Let's see what she's going to do. So we're going to account, we're going to share. We are going to share with professional services because they will need to see the account as well. So again, as with everything in Salesforce, please be a good admin and leave a paper trail behind you. Even better, what you could do is put some bullet points in and say this rule enables XYZ because of this requirement. And then that way you are covered. So we're going to say all accounts that are owned by everyone, so CEO downwards, we're going to share it just with the one role, which is the VP of Professional Services. We're going to give them read-only access to everything. And we're going to save it. So now it's going to go away and calculate. Yeah, so it creates an operation. It runs a script on the database at Salesforce to enable and to create those share table, those sharing and share table entries in the background. Okay. The fourth layer is used for ad hoc record sharing. Now, at the time, you couldn't do this in Lightning. We had to switch to Classic, I think. So please bear in mind that this little video might be a bit out of date. But what we do with manual sharing, switch to Classic. What we do with manual sharing is open up access on a one-off basis. So there's a button on the account, and what you're looking at here, what you're actually looking at on that page when she shows you, where are we? What's been showing you? Yeah, so this here is a list of all of the entries in the share table for the account, and it tells you who's got access to it and why. And then when you do your manual sharing, all you're effectively doing is creating a new sharing, one-off manual share record in the share table in the background. That is going to open up access to Laura Garza, and you'll be able to see that from the sharing reason on the right hand side, you can see how and why that user has access to that record. So that's the first place I go when I'm troubleshooting and testing. I love testing sharing, I can't help it. But when I'm troubleshooting and testing and someone says, I can't see this record, I'll go and find it, click that sharing button, and it gives me a list of all of the reasons that people have got access to it, including role hierarchy, etc. Team sharing, this is about structured collaboration on records. So there are 3 types of team sharing, and I really love this. You have to turn on account teams first. It's a setting in Salesforce where you enable team selling for opportunities, you enable account teams. In terms of use cases for these, if you have a private sharing model and you want to add someone to the account, like you would a Google document, you want to share a document with someone so they can come in and collaborate on it. Account teams is how you do that. Sales teams is how you do it for opportunities, and case teams is how you do it for cases. But you have to switch on account teams first. Default account teams is one of my favorites. Remember I talked about the pair ups between field staff and telesales staff. We used to use default account teams to enable that. So we used to have, if for example, Laura has access to an account, we can make it so on the user record, you'll find a related list that's called default account team, where you can add Gemma to Laura's user as a default account team member. So any account that Laura owns, Gemma will be added automatically to that account team. Let's have a look. Let's see, what should I do here? Yeah, so let's have a little look at how this works. So we're going to go and set up an account team. We're going to enable it in Sales. So you come into Salesforce and just click enabled. And then it asks you what page layouts you're going to apply those to. And then you define your roles. So you say on your account team, you know, this person is collaborating with me as a channel manager, a sponsor, a sales rep, a lead qualifier, and you can add your own custom ones as well. And these are always interesting conversations with customers, because you talk about what's the kind of relationship that what are the kind of relationships that you have when you're selling to people. In our own org, I have team roles because we use account contact relationships. So we actually add Salesforce AE contacts to other opportunities through these roles. Then in order to set up the default account team, you just simply have to go to the user record and you'll see a related list called default account team. And you can see that there is nobody there that is supporting this user by default at the moment. So what do we have to do? We have to go to the team and we enable team selling for opportunities. And we just follow the same steps as we did for accounts. So we add all of the layouts. Okay. So what that means is when you then go and add an opportunity to Salesforce, let's go and see an account to Salesforce, for example. So that's the one we've been looking at. And we look at Acme, you'll be able to see under the related list, there's a section called account team, and you can add a team member there directly. And you can open up the access to all of the opportunities, contacts, and cases that are related to it. Again, you're just creating a record in the share table that you can get at with the data loader and the API. So then save. And now that means that Gemma has access to that account. And you can also, if you have a defined account team member, default account team member, you can go and add, you can use that button that says add default team. So let's see, is she going to go and add that? I think she is. So there's Laura. And we're going to add Gemma to her default account team. So we click add. We can have several different account team members. And we just go and search for Gemma. And we define her level of access to accounts, opportunities, and cases that are owned by Laura. And we define what her default role will be. So is she supporting as a sales manager? Yes. That's saved. So now, every time Laura creates an opportunity, Gemma will be an account, Gemma will be automatically added to that team. And at the moment, so what we're doing here is we're going to transfer this account over to Laura. And we're going to go down, look at the related list, and we're going to be able to see that Gemma is automatically added to that account team as the sales manager. And then when I change the owner back to Gemma, she's still on the account team until we refresh it. Oh, she's just still on the account. Fair enough. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind. When you change the owner, the account team stays. Other ways to share. Territory management. So we did a YouTube study group where we covered the role of territories in managing sharing for Salesforce. So effectively what you're doing is enabling an account to belong to a territory that you then share with users. You add multiple users to that territory, and it helps to create siloed areas where that data is kept, to one piece. Kept in one place. Now, when it comes to territory management, there are different templates that you can create for each year. So what we tend to suggest is to clients is that they spend time thinking about how they want to structure their sales territories for the coming year, and then we align that territory management model inside Salesforce with that. There are other ways to share as well, and other considerations for sharing. There is on our Ladies the Architect YouTube group, there is a video that talks about community sharing and visibility. And that is a fiddly one, because when you start sharing data and exposing data outside of your org, to community users, you have to consider how much of the stuff that is internal are you sharing out, and how much of the stuff that your community members are putting in to Salesforce is then visible to the users internally inside Salesforce. So that's something you have to think about as well. Other ways you can share data: profiles, permission set groups with permission sets assigned to them. There are permission settings that you for view all data, and then per object you've got view all and modify all per object as well, and that basically overrides all the sharing for the people assigned to that profile. I tend to avoid using those, if I'm honest. Other ways you can do it, remember in the sharing settings and the OWD, we scrolled down to the bottom and it said, what are other ways that you want to share? You can share through manager groups. So if you, let's say, are in a different role, let's say you have, you report into two managers, or no, let's say you're based in the UK, but your manager's over in the US and he's in a different role. a different section of the role hierarchy, you can actually define him as your manager and then open up the sharing and grant access to your records just because he's your manager. Now that's really useful for things like timesheets. If you create timesheets in Salesforce, you could use manager sharing in order to ensure that timesheets can be approved by the right people, even if they sit in different parts of the role hierarchy. Apex sharing for another day when all the options aren't right. We have got some programmatic sharing content on the Ladies Be Architects website. YouTube channel. We have completed that since we did this. So Apex sharing is really useful. You would do types of scenarios for Apex sharing. As with anything in Salesforce, try and avoid coding. Try and do as much as you can without coding first. Times when you will need to use Apex for sharing are examples like, I need to grant access to an account record for until the contract end date. That's when you need to either programmatically produce that share record and put it in the share table to say, you know, it expires on this date, and then run a script to delete it later, to delete that entry from the share table, thus taking away the access. Or you can use it for sharing objects that are related via lookup. Financial Force PSA is a classic option of where Apex sharing has been created. If you've got a project record and you've got timesheets, assignments, milestones, all of those things that are custom objects related to that one, they're all related via lookup. So they created a button that says share with project manager. And when you click that button, it goes through each of the different objects related via lookup, and you choose which ones you want to share. And that's just a Visual Force page with a controller behind it that produces that data in the share table afterwards. And then finally, data loader. I have manually loaded sharing records into the share tables before. It's quite satisfying to see it works. That's really all your code is doing. Another thing you can do is you can produce those share records in the object share tables through Process Builder and through Flow. So lots and lots of ways to be creative around sharing. So let's take a look. What are we doing here? So we're going in to look at some accounts. We're going to create a new one called Hello Friend. Define the type and save it. Okay, so let's look at the details. The owner is Gemma. And we're going in to check what role Gemma is in. So she's in the CEO role. She's at the top of the hierarchy. And then we look at Laura. We're going to log in as Laura, and she is further down in the hierarchy. Remember, we looked for Hello Friend. So because of that sharing rule we created, Laura can actually see it, but she can't change it because it's owned by Gemma, and Gemma is in the CEO role at the top of the hierarchy. So Laura can't change it. We log out and go and look at this account again. Do you remember we had the sharing rule that went for the record criteria where we said share all customers? What we're doing now is testing how that works. So we've just changed that account type to be a technology partner instead of a customer. So when Laura searches for Hello Friend, we can't get to it. She can't see it. Okay, now we scroll through some other accounts. And we log out. And we go back to our Hello Friend account. Now you can see that there's no account team on here. So we go and add the team member. We can add Laura to this, and then when we log in as Laura in a minute, we'll be able to see that she's got access. So this video is just showing you how we're tweaking certain settings and then the effect of it, as well as all my old text messages coming through. Read, write, save. There we go. Right, so now Laura's on the account team. If we log in as Laura, she should now be able to see Hello Friend. And it should open up the record instead of showing an error. Okay, this is I find this is the easiest way to test, just logging in and logging out and understanding that experience, because your users will have to follow it. Right, so now we are going to fill in some information, and we're able to change it because we've added her to the team. So logging out as Laura, going back to our Hello Friend account. Yeah, she caught up in the end, didn't she? We can now delete Laura from that account team, and that removes her access to that record. And logging back in as Laura, we try and open up Hello Friend again, it should just error out. There we go. You're not allowed to see it. So that's done by team sharing. That's done by changing the account type in order to activate the sharing rule, which you saw earlier. You can also create sharing rules based on ownership. So you could say if a record is owned by role and subordinate sales, then share with role and subordinates customer service. So that's really the end of the presentation. I hope I haven't fried all your brains too much. Please, if you have any questions, I would love to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. Let me check some question into the chat window.
48.
Yeah. Not all the question.
Okay, should we go through some of the questions?
Okay, so very first question from the Yogesh. Does territory ownership work for all the object?
Oh, that's a good question. I believe it is just accounts, and then it trickles down into the opportunities and contacts. But I think you would need to play with that. Let me find the YouTube for you, and it will give you a bit more information about that. It might answer that question for you. I don't know the answer just now.
If you are correct, it's actually on account only.
It's on accounts.
Yeah. And the next question from Andrin is like, so master detail object relationship have the same private setting is considered implicit.
Implicit. The master detail, yes. So as I said, because in a master detail relationship, you have two objects that are related through that, and therefore one is a child of the other. So if you've got access to the parent through implicit sharing, you will have access to the child. But if you remove that access, you will not have access to the child.
The question